The storm rolled over the plains like an angry sea, wind howling, thunder crawling across the sky. In the distance, a single lonely cabin stood against the fury of the night. Inside, a lantern flickered, throwing long, dancing shadows against the rough wooden walls. That was when she knocked. A desperate, trembling knock that cut right through the storm 3 sharp raps. When he opened the door, she was standing there, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to swallow the flickering light. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They're coming." He was a giant of a man with broad shoulders, a beard as wild as the storm outside, and eyes that had seen more winters than any soul should. Folks in the valley called him Bear Mason, a name spoken with equal parts fear and respect. He was a man who hadn't stepped foot in town for nearly a decade. He looked down at her for a long, silent moment. Then, without a single word, he stepped aside and let her in. You're huddled near the fire, trembling, her hands clutching a small locket against her chest. He poured her some coffee, thick and black, and watched her from across the room. "Who's Kuman?" he finally asked, his voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. She swallowed hard, trying to catch her breath. "Men. 2 of them. They want what's in this." She opened her trembling hand. Lying in her palm was a small gold coin, weathered and strange, with odd markings etched along its edge. Bear stared at it, his face unreadable. He'd seen a coin like that once before, 20 years ago, during the Dakota gold runs. Men had killed, stolen, and died for a coin just like it. He leaned back in his heavy chair, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You shouldn't have come here, miss. The coin brings only death." "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered. "Please, just for tonight, just let me stay." Bear looked at her again, this fragile stranger in his fortress of solitude. The wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, a mournful cry. Finally, he spoke the words that would echo through her memory forever. "All right, you can stay. But if you do, you'll have to marry me." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. She stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. What did you just say?" "I said," he repeated slowly, his voice steady, "if you stay under my roof tonight, you'll do it as my wife. This isn't about love. It's about protection. There are no law men out here on law. They are rules men make for themselves." She stood up, frightened and utterly confused. "You're mad." "Maybe," he said softly, "but a woman alone out here won't live until dawn. Those men will track you, and when they find you here, they'll burn this place to ash, unless they think you're mine." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind pressing against the door, trying to get in. Then, her body trembling, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The storm raged on, as Bear carved 2 lines in the wooden floorboards, crude cross, spoke quiet vows beneath the constant roar of thunder, his voice a low rumble. She repeated them after him, her voice shaking, the words barely leaving her lips. It wasn't a wedding. It was a pact for survival. Afterward, she sat by the fire while he stood watch by the window, his heavy rifle resting in his hands. Every flash of lightning lit up the prairie in a brief, violent burst of daylight. And in one of those flashes, they both saw it. 2 figures on horseback, not far from the ridge. "They found you," Bear said, almost to himself. She gripped her locket tighter, hot tears welling in her eyes. "They won't stop." He looked at her, this stranger who had stumbled into his world, and something deep inside him, something long dormant, shifted. For the first time in years, he felt protective. The riders came near midnight. The thunder masked their approach, but Bear had been waiting. The first man burst through the door, gun drawn, but Bear was faster. The rifle roared once, the sound echoing across the plains. The second man fired back, shattering the lantern and plunging the room into darkness. Smoke, wind, a scream. A scream. Then a heavy silence. Then a heavy silence. Then a heavy silence. Then a heavy silence. When it was over, the 2 intruders lay still on the floorboards. The woman sat frozen by the hearth, her hands pressed over her ears. Bear lowered the rifle, his breathing heavy. "It's done," he said. but she didn't move. Instead, with shaking hands, she opened the locket. Inside was a small, faded photographer man, smiling, with a baby held tight in his arms. "My husband died for this," she said softly. "That coin, it's not gold. It's a map. He found something in the hills, something they wanted." She looked up at Bear, her eyes pools of sorrow. "Now it's taken everyone I love." Bear knelt beside her. "Then bury it," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Let it die here with them." She nodded, and together they dug a hole behind the cabin, burying the cursed coin beneath the frozen soil. Morning came quiet and clean. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed new. Cold sunlight spilled over the vast prairie. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney, a fragile ribbon of peace in the crisp air. She stood by the window, watching the endless horizon. "What happens now?" she asked. Bear shrugged his massive shoulders. "You're free to go." But she didn't move. After a moment, she asked, "When you asked me to marry you, why did you really do it?" He looked out toward the plains, his eyes distant. "Because once, a long time ago, a woman knocked on my door for help. I turned her away. Her breath caught in her throat." He didn't look at her as he spoke, his voice low like wind through dry grass. "She died that night, out there. I buried her myself come morning. After that, I figured if anyone ever came again, I'd never say no." For a long while, neither of them spoke, and she said quietly, "Maybe you got your second chance." He finally looked at her. A faint, unpracticed smile tugged at his weathered face. "Maybe I did." That spring, travelers passing through the valley spoke of a woman living in that old cabin by the ridge with the man they called Bear Mason. They said she wore a gold locket and tended a small garden where 2 unmarked graves lay beneath a lone oak tree. No one ever knew what really happened that stormy night, only that 2 souls, lost in their own way, had found a strange kind of peace in each other. Sometimes, fate knocks not with mercy, but with storms, and when it does, it's not the walls that protect us, but the people who open their doors, even when the past tells them not to. If you felt the chill of the storm and the warmth of redemption in this tale, subscribe to Wild Tales Storytelling. Every story whispers from the winds of time, waiting for you to listen. Thanks for being here.